Cool. So today I'm going to be delivering a webinar on AI-powered market research in the age of AI, and how you should be using it in your roles, and how things are shifting and what the different methods are, and which ones are working and which ones maybe you should try and avoid. The aim of the session today is to plant seeds in your head that will grow into fully formed ideas once you've been able to have a bit of a play around and test. We've got some case studies in here. This is a research one, so this is really about enabling you to understand a bit more about what other people in the market are doing and what kind of tools they may be leveraging. It's not a hands-on one. However, there is some stuff in here that really help you try and get a bit hands-on. But the idea is that enable you to learn a bit more. Kicking off with some stats. So 87% of marketeers are now using AI as a daily basis, so as a core habit, which means that a lot of teams are suggesting that actually, a lot of teams, like 81% of marketeers, are using AI to analyze data and to create insights from data, and actually to generate data as well and use that in their campaigns. Obviously, this goes with a pinch of salt. People are using it, but are they using it every single time? That's a question. Are they using it effectively? That's another question that I have some answers on slightly later on in this slide. But in addition to this, marketeers now are actually starting to see some reasonable level of change in their roles, as in time saved. So traditional marketeers, maybe marketeers that are building content or marketeers that are planning campaigns or events, they might see up to 14 hours in the latest study by HubSpot returned to their schedules each week. And Salesforce has released a metric as well in their State of MarTech report that 88% of marketers are already optimizing their content for AI-generated sources, which again is a massive uptick since last time. And really what this means is that there is an expectation on marketeers to be doing more than they have before, and there's an expectation now on marketeers to also be doing better research than they have before, because now they have the tools to enable them to do it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a line on their budget anymore. A lot of the research that you're able to do is free or very cheap. And yeah, sort of this slide backs that up. So market research isn't a department. It's the questions that you've already been asking every week. So let's step back. What is market research? Market research is it's a number of different places. It's a number of sources. So it's like audience research. So who is buying from us to be able to enrich our personas? And we might have traditionally done this by going out to an agency or by deeply interrogating our customer data. And that might have been led by our data team or our insights team traditionally. By the end of this call, I want you to feel like that is partly on your plate to do now too, because of the tools that you have access to. You might do competitive intelligence, and again, that's generally desk-based research. It's manual, it's looking up people's websites. You might do voice of the customer, so what are people saying about us? And you'll be scanning social and basically trying to get the sentiment of social. You might be doing concept and message testing, so is this campaign actually going to land? Is it going to resonate? Or trend research. What kind of things are emerging in our category and how can we get ahead of them in front of our customers? And that might include things like general cultural shifts, which actually are really hard to nail. Finally, search and content gaps. So what are customers actually searching for? And again, traditionally you'd do that with SEO research, but now you need to consider AI in that too. So market research generally is these kind of core topics. Traditionally, though, market research was a project, and that project you would have had to have scoped the type of research that you want to be delivered by a market research company, or found the paper that someone had already done and then bought that paper. Or you might need to recruit someone to actually do this market research in the field for you and then codify that and turn that into a report so that you can actually use it. And this meant that a lot of marketing teams never actually bothered doing research, and they just went with their guts and what they felt like was going to be good at the time that they needed to get that campaign out, because they were traditionally gold by delivering campaigns and delivering leads, and it was less about actually delivering campaigns that they thought were going to resonate with less about delivering campaigns that they had proven examples of them resonating, and more about just getting it out there and making sure that that funnel stays as full as possible. And we see over time when people do this, that the quality of the audience that they send to degrades because they're being over messaged, or they're being messaged with campaigns that just aren't necessarily relevant. So the idea is that you can do a lot better research up front that enables you to actually create better campaigns with much better targeting. And generally, the way that we're trying to see this now is that research is actually like an ongoing activity. And because a lot of research that you may do, and I'll come on to how you can do this research in a moment, but because a lot of the research that you may do generally needs to be like an ongoing activity. So rather than just doing it once and then it stays and degrades in its quality, this is something you do over time. And what I want you to be able to do yourselves actually is like build your own layer of research and insights. And we'll be leveraging NotebookLM to do that. And we'll probably do a hands-on session on that at some point in the future. But I've got a few slides in this deck that actually help you understand what that might look like. But the aim behind this is for you to create a layer that you can ask questions to before you do any say campaigning, or before you plan your event, so that you can determine if that data is if that campaign is actually going to land. Just because I see on LinkedIn all the time people saying that they've already basically automated their entire MarTech stack, or marketeers just saying that they've done everything and they're now ahead of the curve and they're doing all this kind of stuff. I thought I just wanted to put this in here as like a bit of a gut check on you might be feeling a lot of pressure around delivering an AI, and you might be feeling a lot of behind the curve, and you're not alone in that. So 75% of marketers currently use AI, but they still send generic one-way campaigns. So actually, that I should say 75% of marketers that are using AI feel like they're still sending generic one-way campaigns. The number of people that actually use AI is much higher. 80% of people feel pressured to adopt AI faster than they currently are, so they feel like they're behind the curve. And 57% of organizations say that their data is not actually AI ready. And in doing that, so being able to do that isn't in a lot of marketers' remits. And so today, what I'm trying to get you to consider is that actually you can create some of this data yourself. You might be able to synthesize some of this data yourself. And that's what some other marketing companies are doing, where they don't necessarily have the control over the underlying data that they use. The 6% of marketers feel like they have fully implemented AI into their workflow. And that means that they are fully generating campaigns. They're using AI for pretty much every action in a marketing campaign. So yeah, I just want to pop that one in there just to make it sound like You should definitely be building your own layer. You should already have your own layer. In reality, not that many people have these kinds of things yet, but the aim is to get there, hopefully by the end of this year. So what is the layer? You can think of it as like three different things. One is like a listening lens. One is about listening to what your customers are saying and having that in a centralized place, so in a central location where you can leverage it. And you can actually use that data. Traditionally, if you're listening to social, you're generally just getting an overarching sentiment of what people think about your brand. Now, actually, with AI, that can be vastly superior to this. You can pull out feature requests, you can consider who your champions are, you can reward those champions, all that kind of additional like community benefit that you get from that. You can also now, leveraging AI, synthesize data. So you can create synthetic audiences to test if things are going to work or not. And to be able to do that, you actually probably do need AI-ready data. And AI-ready data means that you can very confidently use it in an AI process. But I'll talk more about how some companies have done that today, and that might trigger some ideas for you, how you may be able to do that in the future as well, or how you might want to talk to some people who might be able to help you do that. And then the final one is like the investigate layer, which is where you'd be using things like deep research agents to run inquiries about things like, what are our competitors doing? How does our product stand up against our competition? What is our USP? Is there any micro or macro economic trends that are affecting these particular regions that I support? These ongoing deep reports that AI is now able to produce for you for free and in an automated way that you can then leverage. So the three different layers: listening to customer sentiment and intelligence to help you create better marketing, simulating data, and this is AI is only going to get better at this, where you don't necessarily know the answer, and traditionally you'd go out to an agency to say, find out this thing for me. You may now be able to do that with AI, assuming that you've got good roles and good data. And investigating, so basically running those reports that help you understand what's happening in the market, what your competition are doing, how you stack up as a business. And these three together, if we if we can combine those into what I'm calling the layer, you have an amazing data set for being able to query before you run a campaign and before you do an event to see if that kind of thing is going to resonate, or if you need to maybe shift gears. So one of the case studies that I've extracted is from Figma. I'm sure lots of people that will watch this have used Figma, or at the very least they've heard of Figma. It's one of the leading design tools on the planet, probably directly after Adobe Photoshop. But what they did was they released a product called FigJam, and they did this back in the early 2024. And what they did with that release was they made it so that they were trying to be as customer centric as possible, which means that they needed a single view of what everyone was saying about that particular product. And that meant that they needed to get data from every single channel where customers could interface into this. So that would be Slack, it would be support requests, it would be forums where this kind of thing was being discussed, it would be on G2, like anywhere where a customer might talk about this particular product, they were finding that information and collating that information. And they would use that information in a number of different ways that enabled them to do better marketing and actually understand their customers better. So they used it when they were planning their product, they used it when they were launching new features and then marketing those new features. And then actually they embedded it into their onboarding workflows, where they basically provided this like AI summarized feedback so that people understood before they even got into like supporting customers, what the general sentiment was for that customers felt about the product. and the kinds of challenges that they face, so they were better able to serve those. And Notion, Perplexity, Strava, they all do the same thing. They had this, what they call the VOC, the voice of the customer. It's much like a CRM, where you have a single view of a customer, like this source of truth. This is the same, but for what the customer sentiment looks like and what customers are saying about your product. And they found that to be hyper successful. So this is like the listening mode. They use a platform called Interpret. I've never used that platform. I can't necessarily speak to that platform, but it does lots of social scraping, and bringing that into a single centralized location that you can then query and leverage. The second case study I've got in here is around the simulation. This one was done by EY, obviously massive business. And they traditionally, they would pay quite a lot of money for investors, so people that were thinking about investing, to answer surveys for them. And this is how they would traditionally get the data that they needed to be able to determine if they should launch a new product or if they should double down on something. And they decided instead, actually, they did that survey, and it cost them 7 figures. It cost them, I think it was close to 6 months of like time spent to be able to do this. And then the next year, in 2025, they decided to see if AI was good enough at synthesizing the outputs. So they ran the same survey, but instead they put into AI the role that they were expecting someone to be. So in this case, they basically put their personas in, so the people that they were trying to target, and they then ran the same questions through that audience to see how closely the answers that AI would come up with would match the actual ones that they delivered in 2024. And they found that for the majority of the questions, it was a couple of points out. Like you can see there, do you invest long term? It's 2 points out. Do you trust your advisor? It's 1 point out. The one that really didn't land, and I've got a slide on this later, was like, how much do you invest, or how much do you know about crypto? And this was emerging in 2024. In 2025, it probably was, the real life number probably was closer to 31%, but it didn't match the 2024 data because it's a much more like emerging field. There's much less long-term data that they'd be able to ground on. So if you have a scenario where traditionally you would go out and you would ask people questions, maybe you could try first simulating the answers to those questions by using AI and feeding in a role and asking it that role to answer those questions. And if you do that multiple times, obviously AI might give you slightly different answers, but if you do that multiple times, you should be able to then gather the results in a format like this. It's definitely worth a try, and models have come along even further since 2025. EY used a platform to do this. So they used a platform called Aura, AARA, which let them do this and that platform is obviously focused around doing this. But I feel like you could probably automate some of this now in something like Gemini or Claude. The last one is deep research. So I don't actually have a case study on deep research, but I do have a bunch of slides on deep research because it's probably the easiest thing that you can do if you haven't started doing that already. You have a number of tools at your disposal. So you've got Perplexity, you've got Claude, you've got Gemini, you have OpenAI Deep Research. Like all of these tools will do the same set of functions for you, which is take your brief, you go to the web, it will go to the web and it will do a lot of research in that particular area, and it will come back to you with a long report. And what I suggest that you do to make that even better is do these things. So don't necessarily overthink your prompt. You can spend ages writing your prompt for deep research, and you can basically spell out every single thing and exactly the format that it should reply in and what it needs to consider. If you are going to do that, please use AI to help you write that prompt, because it obviously knows which things really tune the report. But actually what a lot of these tools will do, if you've left areas, gray areas, they'll ask you questions that help it fill out its own answers. So it will do a little bit of immediate research to see if there's anything else that it needs to ask you about. And then it will come back and ask you to answer those additional questions. And those are the ones that really will help drive and shape that report. Next, you should, to enable it to be as successful as possible, if it's relevant, bring in your private context. So this is things that it can read from your environment. So if you're using Gemini, you can add your Google Workspace, which means it can look at things like your chat and your email. And I've got another slide on why this might be relevant to in just a second. Or your real data. So if you have a bunch of partners that you want to work with and you've got like fact files or something against them in a particular folder in Google Drive, then you can include that as part of the context, and it will use that and it will help shape the report based on that. And if you're using Gemini, you can do this in a gem as well. So underneath where it says default tool here, annoyingly, I've covered it up. There is the option to choose a default tool, and you can choose deep research. And also, importantly, if you store information about something that you think you want to run research on, so maybe it's your market, maybe it's the campaigns that you've previously run, you can actually now link to GEMS a NotebookLM instance. So this deep research gem, so anytime you trigger this deep research gem, it's going to run that deep research report. It's going to look in your NotebookLM instance for the context about that too. So yeah, if you've got NotebookLM set up already, maybe there's the opportunity to run a deep research on it, so consider that. Also choose the destination. Typically these are reports. However, I find that these long form reports don't necessarily resonate with all audiences. So you may take the summary from your report and chuck it into another Gemini chat and get it to create a web page for you, or get it to create a PDF for you that you can then share around with the core insights. And finally, what I tend to do is run the same deep research through Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, OpenAI. With the same prompt. It takes 5 minutes to do it across all of them. And then I combine all those together in one NotebookLM instance, and I get it to then synthesize the results across all, which helps give a greater view across the particular topic that I'm trying to ask about. I mentioned that I had a slide on why you might want to include your emails. This one's a bit off topic. It's not necessarily like marketing research based. It's more personal research based. But one of the things that I tend to do is in Gemini, because I have it linked to my emails and my chats and my calendar and all of those kind of things, I get it to run research on me and how I work. So I run a deep research report probably every 2 months to find places where potentially automation could have been embedded into my workflow, and it does a very good job of actually distilling down like where I'm doing repetitive tasks, where people are asking me the same questions and I should just have something ready to go for that, where my chaos sits, and often that is my chaos sits in me trying to keep everything in my head rather than writing it down, and it's suggested that I should move over to some more written workflows. But yeah, I would like a lot of people now who are really trying to speed up what they do and find opportunities in what they do are actually using AI to help them spot trends that are occurring in their workflows. So do, when you get a chance, go into Gemini or whichever model you use the most, connect up your email and maybe your to-do list or whatever notes app you've got, and then get it to do a deep research on you and maybe around your efficiencies, where you could be more efficient, or find tasks that I do regularly that I should be able to improve. It's surprising what it comes back with. And then this is generally where your layer sits. I think it should sit in NotebookLM at the moment, because NotebookLM is just such a good tool for aggregating lots of data. And it's a really good tool for actually running these deep researches from in the first place. So if I already have my customer sentiment and my competitive analysis that I've run in Gemini Deep Research or directly within NotebookLM, I can import them in here, and then I can ask questions to one place across all of those different data sets. And I can, if I want to, generate other things like audio overviews and the PowerPoints that you may have seen in the past. PowerPoint slides. The other thing that I suggest, I realize there's quite a lot to take away now presenting this, but I'll share these slides, I'll get them uploaded. This is something I presented to Zoom around how you can get the most out of the research that you can do on the web. So traditionally, like now, any of us can run as many of these research queries as we like, almost. Like there is obviously a limit, but we can run a lot of these, which means we potentially have access to a huge amount of information that we never would have had before. And if we don't have a way of validating that information is actually real and not a hallucination, or making it relevant to us, or, you know, doing something with it that actually makes it actionable for us, then you will quickly forget that you're doing this, and it just won't prove valuable to you, and it just won't be part of your workflow, which is what you need it to be for it to be relevant. What I proposed to them was like this framework that I called REAP, so like reaping the rewards of having access to all this additional data. And first stage is research. I've just spoken about lots of things about research, so doing that automated research. The next is to evaluate. And because we now have access to tools that let us do this kind of thing, like Google Workspace Studio or NAN, where we can do these multiple steps in order, we can run multiple different AI stages, basically, to do these things on our behalf. So first one is research, do a deep research for me. Second one, pass that deep research into an evaluate phase. This evaluate phase basically uses AI as a judge. So AI will critique the report that the first model has done and find things that maybe are misses or are not relevant, or maybe just are total hallucinations, and just validate what is true and what isn't true. The next stage is the assess phase, which is making it relevant to you. And what I presented in that section, and I'll share this, is that this is where you start to score the output. So what matters to you? Not everything in that report is going to be relevant. What do you actually care about? Let's score the output. Let's make it relevant to you. Let's make it so that you can very easily update it in future to continue to be relevant to you. So this is you using AI to score the content based on your criteria and only selecting the bits of content that you actually care about, rather than having this monolith of a report every single time. Then the final one is like preparing that. So making it relevant so that you'll actually engage with it. So that might be that it goes into a slide deck, or you automatically put it into a new row in your Notion, or you create yourself an email and you send it to yourself, or maybe you generate a report for the team to view every week. But this is the important one, where you're actually putting it somewhere where you're going to leverage it. And all of this now, because of these automation tools, can happen whenever this report runs, which is really nice. So I've got a whole video on like diving into those in a bit more detail and an example of what that might look like. And I'll share that video as well alongside this if you're interested. 3 places though where these kind of insights fail. So these reports, these bits of research that we do will often fail. So one is like out of distribution questions. So if you're trying to synthesize some data, or actually if you're asking models data about things that it won't have had much training on. So how will Gen Alpha respond to our pricing model? Well, there isn't a lot of information about Gen Alpha actually buying anything yet. So it's going to be quite hard for it to consider that. Or if you're trying to synthesize that data, you're not going to have any previous examples of that data, or like forecasting demand for a category that didn't exist 12 months ago. A lot of the models are now trained up to a really, really close point. But again, it's that long tail of data that actually makes these models hyper accurate now. That is that's the thing to watch out for. So you want to be trying to synthesize data or ask questions on things that it's had a chance to really start learning and form these longer form relationships in its memory. Vendor friendly correlation. So if you are loading in documents about your company, or you're finding online documents about other companies, like let's say Salesforce, a lot of the results that they publish are the ones that they've cherry picked to be the best, which means that you can't necessarily rely on them being accurate. Maybe they were accurate in the way that they were tested. You may have seen the adverts on the TV that are like 95% of women think that this cream is making them feel younger. And you see that it was like tested on 8 people or something like that. You see it at the bottom. Same goes here, right? They're cherry picking. So do consider when you're creating your reports that vendors that you're potentially pulling this information from may not be the best sources. And therefore in your reports, maybe consider if there's any third parties that actually audit these things to determine if it's relevant for you. And then finally, the last one to watch out for really is data that isn't AI ready. So as we mentioned before, 57% of organizations admit that their data is not AI ready. That was in a Gartner report this year. Like agents are getting very, very good. However, they can make major mistakes if this data just isn't in a way that they can very easily access it, or if it's really chaotic. So if there's like 14 places where I need to find out what the sentiment of an individual customer is, it's probably going to struggle. Whereas if that was in one standardized place where the agent had access to all of it without needing to make lots of different calls and its context to drop off over time, then that would be a much better place for that to work. When we're thinking about research, you've probably already got KPIs around marketing in your role. But when we're thinking about research in particular, if you're someone that actually has control over maybe setting some of their KPIs or considering some of the new ones that are now available to you, or maybe just some things that you would like to start tracking, maybe you might have at the moment like campaign shipped and briefs delivered and all that kind of stuff. Maybe like question to decision time. So having a question about whether you think a campaign is going to be relevant. Traditionally, that might have taken 6 weeks or at least 2 weeks to like do some web-based, desk-based research. And maybe you would have had to interface another team. I'm quite confident now that you could get to a pretty decent decision time based purely on using deep research and some of the other data points that I've mentioned. The number of campaigns, the percentage of campaigns informed by real-time insight. So before you're about to launch a campaign, you've managed to query the data in real time in probably Notebook-LM to determine if this is still relevant. Time to iteration on a live campaign. So if a campaign is already live and you hear something in the market based on your automated research that you feel like maybe needs to change, how quickly did you get to that rather than, missing the wave? And then listening layer coverage. So how many of your channels are you actually able to listen to what customers are actually talking about your brand, and how many of those, I guess, are in a centralized location? What can you do to get started? So first of all, you need to find where the data sits. So you may need to ask around, determine where actually you can find what the sentiment your customers are talking about, where your NPS scores are, where you can find social channel data, and if you even have access to that, that might be a limitation that you have. Get some of those sources into a Notebook-LM notebook and try and synthesize those down so that you then have like a general set of maybe personas that different people talking about your product, and then try querying that layer for things that you think you know and see what the answers are. The next thing I would suggest is to actually, maybe even the first thing I would suggest is to run some deep research. So run deep research on your brand, run deep research on your competition, run deep research on your market, run deep research on the campaigns that you've even launched in the past. Like if you feed a Google Drive folder into a deep research report with maybe the results, and maybe you're asking questions like, look at the competition and see why our results weren't as good as maybe X, Y, or Z thing, it will be able to do that for you as well. So really do think about how you might be able to leverage deep research working in the background to give you some additional insights before maybe you run your next campaign or you schedule your next event. And then finally, try and automate this. So ad hoc deep research is great, but having deep research that automatically goes into a shared store that maybe you and your team can access is way, way, way better than it just being sat on your machine enabling you to be slightly better. And maybe try out the REAP framework. If you need any support, obviously I'm here. Message me on Slack or chuck some time in my diary whenever it's free, and I'll be very, very happy to talk through maybe some of the deep researches that I do and I find value from. Finally, I just wanted to give an example of obviously vibe coding. I do a hell of a lot of this now for a lot of different people inside Algo Marketing. One of the tools that I have vibe coded is a event research tool. And hopefully this starts to, I've put this in here really so that it tries to bring this together a little bit about what traditionally may have happened and what maybe we can do now instead. But what this tool does is it enables a event marketeer to determine that the event that they want to host is going to be hosted on a day where things like competition aren't running events and there is no tube strikes or train strikes and the weather looks like it's going to be reasonable and the venue is actually available and it can support the number of people that they want to run this event for, and it's not outside of their budget. And traditionally, this would have taken someone a huge amount of desk research to do to make sure they're definitely getting the right venue, that there are no strikes or anything, that the audience is going to show up and they're not going to be at competitors' events. So what I did was I built a 6-agent system. So one of the agents was a risk analyst, one was a competitor intelligence analyst, one was looking at venues, one was looking at the logistics, so whether or not there was trains and buses that could get to those locations, one's compliance, and one's trends and talent. So who might we actually be able to have at those events talking, what maybe they should be talking about. And what it does is it takes someone's brief and it converts that into like a live dashboard of which venues it thinks are the most relevant for this place, and if there's any risks, and if they should change the date that they've specified because competition are running events, etc. And the nice thing about this, the thing that sets this apart, is obviously someone could manually do this and it would take time, quite a lot of time, to do all that research across a number of different venues. The really nice thing about this is that every day this will run again, and every day they'll be able to see if a competitor has spun up an event. They'd be able to see if there's suddenly engineering works on the train line, which if you're in the UK is pretty much guaranteed, or if there's like a severe weather warning or something along those lines. So something that might really impact their event and make them need to make a last ditch decision. And so the reason why I put this here is if you find yourself continually doing research, so regularly needing to research the same thing, let's try and build that as a tool that you can leverage over time. Or if there's something that you've always wished that you had, which was like a continual, always on thing that was checking something on your behalf, then now is the best time to do that, really. This is all grounded, by the way. So all this data that the AI is finding and searching for, this is all grounded in traditional Google search data as well, which is one of the nice things about using the Gemini API to get this information. Cool. So, summary then. I would suggest if you're not already, run some deep researches. So think about the types of things that you might want to understand before maybe you do your next activity. Like, what would enable me to do a better job? For me, it's like learning about new AI tools and technologies and being able to stay on top of what is relevant and what isn't, and what works and what doesn't, and how to enable people to deliver in that. So like a lot of mine is around the market and how it's shifting and how it's changing and what tools are available. Yours may be different. But what I suggest you do from this is you go away and you think about the things that you may wish you knew more about and set up a deep research in your tool. You can do that just by going to the standard chat interface, and there's always like a little tools drop down and you choose deep research or deep. Maybe it's called, it's always deep something. And you'll get that rich report that you can then synthesize and turn into something that you actually want to use. Do that for a couple of different areas. So if you're new to the company that you're in, or if you've been there for a while, maybe just ask it, how do we stack up to our competition? That might inform you to make different decisions that you haven't considered before. Or even you could try, what are the case studies that my business has published in the field that I'm in, potentially marketing, because it might mean that you can see things that haven't necessarily been shared internally, but they have been shared externally. And you can now find them and potentially find those people and reach out to them and say, I'd really like to see what you've done there, see if we could use it in our team. That is what I'd recommend. I will pause for any questions. But I will leave it 30 seconds. If there's no questions, then I thank you for coming, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. I don't have a question personally.
Thanks, Connor. Appreciate it. Cool. A final tip, maybe. All these slides here that you've seen today, they've all been created using a standardized agent slide building process, which I'm hoping to share in a future session as well. I'm very happy with how they've come out. Cool. Cheers all. Speak soon.
Thank you. Bye.